Mid-morning with Mike Graham. Talk Radio.
Time to say a very good morning to Mr. Peter Hitchens from the Mail on Sunday. Peter, very good morning to you. Welcome back.
Good morning to you too.
Now, I'd have to say, my travels over the weekend, I went down to Sussex to see my children and my dog.
You finally went?
I did, yes, and we had a barbecue, which was very nice, but the traffic, quite frankly, was as if there had been no lockdown. The beaches that I saw from Bournemouth to Brighton to Durdle Door and up in Richmond, Yorkshire, the waterfalls up there, it seems as though an awful lot of people seem to have forgotten that there even is a lockdown.
Well, yeah, that's a point. True, and you're quite right. If you announce a change on a Monday, then you can't be really surprised if people assume that it's already in effect on the previous Saturday and Sunday. That was asking for it. I imagine they knew it would happen.
Yes.
There's been precious little so far that I've heard of people demanding that we all go back to the previous situation because everybody behaved irresponsibly, but maybe I've missed something. So I think that was expected. I think the government probably realised that although the thing isn't widely politically understood for what it is becoming extremely irksome, and in weather like this, to try and confine people to their own homes and their own immediate circle for much longer would simply have created an explosion. So I think they've just given way on that. But the thing itself, the restraint of trade, the prevention of people from working and from running businesses still continues. The pubs sort of open, but they open for takeaway. Restaurants, similarly, they can do takeaway, but they can't actually open their dining rooms, and that's a big thing for them. And an awful lot of workplaces remain closed or heavily restricted with ridiculous regulations about how far people can sit from each other and wearing masks and all kinds of other futile rubbish, which makes it almost impossible to act normally, and in many cases to act in a way that even breaks even if you're an actual business.
But I imagine that over the course of the next 2 weeks, and certainly over the course of the entire month of June, when we're talking at the end of this month, I'm sure things will have been much more normalised, because I was saying to somebody earlier on the show, I went past a pub in Vauxhall on Friday, and basically there were people sitting outside on picnic tables having got their takeaway beer from a window 2 yards away, and they were sitting outside this pub, not 2 metres apart, as if they were just in a pub as it would normally be. Now, of course, there's not as many people there as there would normally be, but it's as if that pub has now opened, as far as I'm concerned.
You're up to a point, yes, but if the It doesn't. I don't think, especially if the weather changes, it doesn't do all that much for the pub trade. I had a really withering letter over the weekend from a guy who runs a pub in Farringdon in Oxfordshire, saying that the whole thing had been an absolute ruination for him.
Yeah, and many people. I mean, I've got friends.
It's really serious for an awful lot of people. This is their livelihood, and it has been taken away. And a slight loosening of the bonds doesn't actually do it for most of them. No,
but I wonder, as with every week that goes by, whether the loosening of the bonds by the government is being done in the way that it's being done. For 2 reasons. One, for them to avoid any kind of blame if it all goes horribly wrong, and if for some reason there is a second peak, which is beginning to look less and less likely because it's not happening in any of the other places where lockdown was lifted. And 2, it's because they genuinely don't want to have to tell people precisely what to do. They're sort of hoping, like this weekend, the public rises up and just does what it wants.
Somebody put this very cleverly. I don't know who it was, but they said that the public were leading the government out of the shutdown rather than the other way around.
I think that's what they want. I think that's deliberate.
These people are fundamentally irresponsible. The people who are in charge of us, they are not willing to take responsibility. I'd contrast. I think we were discussing last week the virtues of saying sorry. Well, she hasn't gone anything like as far enough for me. But Erna Solberg, the Prime Minister of Norway, last week went on TV and said that it had been a panic. I probably took many of the decisions out of fear.
Yeah.
And was it necessary to close schools? Perhaps not.
Yeah.
I think what we need from our leaders is admissions of this kind, admissions of recognitions that they got it wrong. They can't lead us out of it until they do. One of the things which continues to perplex me is this, what I call the Ratnerization of public transport. Governments have quite rightly spent billions of pounds, nothing like as many billions as I would like, over the past 20 or 30 years on doing something to upgrade our very tatty and inadequate public transport system. And now the Prime Minister has gone on television a couple of weeks ago to say basically it's not safe to travel on trains or buses. So while the government has actually in effect renationalised the railways, something I've long urged, and has also spent billions on paying bus companies to send empty buses carting huge loads of fresh air around the cities of the country. The actual proper reopening of the country, which must depend on an awful lot of people using public transport, can't happen because of this ridiculous belief being spread that simply by going on public transport you risk your life and you risk carrying infections to other people. It's just not true.
Well, I don't know if it's not true. I don't know if you can say that. It's certainly
none of this stuff is based on any hard. The whole
you'd have to.
7-foot rule is, as we now know, is based on conjecture. There's so much of this has been, and if you look, and I continue to study it daily. If you look at the figures, particularly from the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine from Oxford University, the virus is actually in decline.
Yes. Well, I was talking to Professor Carol,
independently of anything that we do.
Well, I was talking to Professor Carol Sikora this morning, and there's a report by Reuters from Italy in which one of their epidemiologists is saying that it's practically gone now from Italy. It's still there in a very much weaker form, but I've formulated this hypothesis that it's a bit like a hurricane, where it comes into land, and as soon as it hits the land, it weakens. As soon as it goes through a bunch of people, it weakens. And so you end up with, hurricane-force winds becoming tropical storm winds and becoming no winds at all. And I think that's where we go.
I can't begin to explain why. But what I do know is that people are making all kinds of assumptions about it. I mean, for instance, this talk of a second peak, well, I don't know exactly where it comes from, but a very underreported statement by Professor Hugh Pennington, a very renowned biologist from Aberdeen, microbiologist from Aberdeen University, some weeks ago. So I've seen no evidence to support the idea that there would be a second peak of the virus.
Well, this is what I was saying, because certainly in countries,
and yet we had people going on the BBC on Saturday morning saying, "Oh, this is terribly dangerous. The government are taking a terrible risk by making these by loosening the rules as they are." And I just wish these people would be tested more.
Well, I wonder as well.
I wish Professor Neil Ferguson had been tested more when he was making his what now turn out, I think, definitively to have been, how shall I put it, exaggerated predictions.
Well, exactly. Well, funnily enough, again...
How do you know this, Professor?
Well, again...
What are you basing it on?
I put this to Professor Carol Sikora, a man who's constantly been a voice of reason throughout all of this. And
Indeed
I said, why is it that these models that we seem to work with are so wildly inaccurate? And he said, well, the reason that they exaggerate them so much is that an epidemiologist who gets it wrong and everybody dies doesn't keep his job. Nobody gets sacked for suggesting that loads of people will die and then they don't.
Well, that's true enough, but on the other hand, people will die as a result of these mistakes. And as I keep saying, it's quite clear that a large number of the excess deaths being recorded in the past few weeks are not excess deaths from people who've died of COVID-19.
No.
Not even excess deaths from people who've been alleged to have died from COVID-19, which is and probably haven't, which is a very large number of people. But excess deaths from people who didn't go to hospital with heart attacks, didn't attend for cancer screenings, or in some other way died.
But I'm not sure that I go along
because of the panic measures which have been imposed on the country.
But I'm not sure I buy all that, because one of the reasons that people haven't been going to A&E in as large numbers is partly due to other reasons as well. For example, many fewer road accidents have taken place because there's been fewer cars on the road.
Do you know, it's quite surprising if you check just how small the casualty rates from road accidents nowadays are. They're much smaller, for instance, than accidents in the home.
Mm-hmm. No, I get that, but it's what I'm saying is it's one of the.
I check on this at the beginning because I thought it was an interesting fact. I don't have the figures to hand, but if you look them up, you'll be surprised.
Yes,
I mean, every one of them is a tragedy, but it simply isn't that big. What I think certainly has happened is that the Friday and Saturday night frenzies in accident and emergency departments of
well, that's because the pubs
drugs,
are closed.
That has undoubtedly been much been much reduced. But that's not what we're talking about. We're here talking about deaths.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is that, there are many deaths which are being recorded now as COVID-19 deaths, which are simply not COVID-19 deaths, right?
Yeah, well,
now,
the government have admitted that.
Yes, but I don't understand why they keep counting them, because it's almost as if, heaven forfend, they're trying to make us more frightened than we should be.
How can I put this? I think that there might have been a feeling at the beginning of this that it would help help public obedience of the rules if the figures were, how should I put it, stated as emphatically as possible.
Yes.
I'm not trying to make
I think I see what you're saying.
But I think that habit has remained, and the problem is they've
it's got worse.
As a result of having what seemed to me to be extremely lax rules about recording who died of COVID. They've got totals which now look much worse than they really were. I know about this thing because I remember for a long time I had a major doubt about the crime statistics, which were being widely believed. And people said, "Oh, come on, people don't make up or fiddle crime statistics." And eventually, the House of Commons Select Committee came out with a report which established beyond doubt that the police had been doing so.
Yes.
And all the details of what they'd done. So
they massage all statistics, don't they?
His first rule of statistics is, if it's politically important, it will be fiddled.
Yes.
And I think that we may find that when the what I hope will be the major judicial inquiry into this mess takes place, that this will be one of the things which is examined. The problem is, of course, that because so many people are cremated and there is no conceivable possibility, even if it were thinkable, of actually going back on many of these assessments, no one will ever know how many of those recorded as having died of COVID-19 did in fact die of something else.
Yes.
But I
think the bottom line in all of this, Peter, for me, is that it depends on how it plays out economy-wise and in terms of the final number. Because I think if the economy recovers, and I know that you and I differ slightly on that, if the economy recovers, and there's no sign yet, of course there are people who are suffering, and of course there are people whose businesses have been ruined, but there are also people who are thriving. We're talking today about reports of something like 126 million beers, 20 million burgers, 60 million sausages being stocked by the supermarkets. That's an awful lot of money. And I'm going to give you a quote here. You might have seen this in the Times at the weekend from Anders Tegnell, the Swedish state epidemiologist. He basically says this: at the end of this, we might look at each other and realise, no, whatever we did didn't make much of a difference. The Swedish model or the British model or the Dutch model, all of them, in the end, they just took a shorter or longer time. And the effects on society and the economy were different. But the health consequences might be very similar in the end.
I yield to no one my admiration for Anders Tegnell's skills as an epidemiologist, and for his courage in standing up against what must have been very considerable pressure to go further than he did.
But what he's basically saying,
whether he's looked in any great detail at the books of the British economy, most of the people who are doing so at the moment, I think, come away white-faced.
I know, but what I'm saying is that
what we have done, and the problem with these things is it doesn't have an instant effect on your street. You will not see now the effects of all the money that has ceased to circulate, of all the money that's been borrowed that doesn't exist, all the sustaining of jobs which wouldn't otherwise have been sustained.
Quite the reverse.
You don't see it, but eventually Rishi Sunak has to come to the country with his first emergency budget. And when he does that, that's when you'll see it. And I think we can disagree as much as we like, and there isn't much point in doing so. I say, wait a bit.
Yes.
Absolutely. If you think that I'm wrong about the economy, stick around. And if I'm wrong, then you have me back on, and I will grovel in public.
No, there's no need for that.
Having spread alarm and despondency over a non-existent problem. I promise that's what I will do.
Listen, I know you would do,
I will
because
be very pleased to do so, because if our economy survives this in a better state than I fear, then I'll be glad to grovel.
Listen, you certainly won't need to grovel, but I know you to be an honourable man, and I would expect nothing less. But more interestingly, I was enjoying your tweet yesterday when you said that since our conversations have begun, you've put on half a stone. I'm sorry to say that I've probably done the same, although you wouldn't notice it so much on me because I'm a bit larger than I used to be. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because we are now creatures of the lockdown. As I was driving back home from having visited my children in Sussex, looking around London, more and more pubs are opening up, more and more fast food joints are opening up. It feels like there's something happening which is taking us out of it, though, don't you think?
Well, it's partly that, but I mean, the real problem is working from home, which I've always known. I've done it twice before. I did it in Moscow. I did it in Washington, D.C. You're too close to the refrigerator.
Yes.
If you feel like making yourself a nice tomato sandwich, then that's what you do.
Yeah.
If you're at work, you don't do that. So it's not...
And what is the work situation? Because
it's another illustration of a point I ceaselessly make to people, that exercise does not keep your weight down. I probably have more exercise in the past few months than I've had for some time, because I'm able to go on sustained, long, flat-out bike rides of the kind which commuting doesn't really allow you to do. And so I'm probably fitter, but also fatter.
Yes.
But
undoubtedly,
this kind of the way of life where I'm working from home and never far from the fridge does result, unless you've got the most tremendous self-discipline, which I don't possess, it makes you fatter.
Yeah. And what are you hearing about?
So an interesting way of recording time, really. How many pounds and ounces has this thing lasted for?
Right. And what about the work situation? Because I mean, I'm currently in a studio amongst a very small number of people who are working in the News UK building at London Bridge. You would normally be going to Kensington, where Associated Newspapers headquarters is. Are they operating with hardly anybody at all? Are they operating with everybody?
Some people are going back. I mean, there are complications, particularly those affecting people like me who are long-distance commuters.
Yes.
Which I won't go into in detail, but I mean, I do intend and hope. I would like to be back now, but for various reasons, I can't be. I'm hoping that gradually sanity will, maybe the pubs being open will make the country more sane.
Yes.
But whatever it is, I'm hoping that sanity will eventually make it easier for me to start going back into the office 5 days a week again.
And how amused were you by the shenanigans of Her Majesty's press last week? I know you wrote this weekend about Dominic Cummings and how glad you were that he didn't get fired. But we've now seen a kind of a constant stream of people from various parts of the political divide who seem to have been ignoring the lockdown.
Well, I think this is one of the things which, I mean, I'm so completely against people being pursued for behaving in normal ways.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why I didn't want Dominic Cummings to be fired or in any way disciplined, because the point about what he did was really that he demonstrated what I've suspected for a long time, which is that the people at the heart of this, everybody who really understands everything, they do not believe this any more than I do in practice. They may pretend to believe it in public, but in reality, they know it's ludicrous.
Well, when the chips are down, I guess they make a decision which is not necessarily based on what they...
are a much better demonstration of their real opinions than anything they say. And they say, but I would imagine huge numbers of people have made large or small breaches of the rules over the past couple of months, and by and large, they've been lucky with their neighbours who haven't dogged them in. But but
thank goodness for that, because do you really want to live in a sort of Stasi-inspired East Germany?
I think it would be horrible, and that's another reason why I would not join in the Cummings frenzy. I said, basically, this is founded on somebody informing on him. Yeah. And do you want to reward that?
And one of those people, it turns out, made it up.
Well, yeah, the whole thing is so full of complexity. I think I'll just keep out of that, if I might.
Yes, no, absolutely right.
Especially on air.
So now, as far as the whole situation goes with this government, you say that they are irresponsible, deeply irresponsible. That's quite an allegation to make against a government that I would say is trying to do the best they can do to get us out of this horrible mess, and who are certainly not doing any worse, really, in real terms than any other country.
Well, they're irresponsible because they're immature and poorly educated, and have no real either moral or political foundation to their actions. It's not. That's the problem with modern politics. Is as somebody once quite correctly described, it's show business for ugly people.
Yeah,
that's
true.
It's a place where people can show off. Where they can get paid far more than they deserve for doing far less than most people have to do, and where they can also assuage their vows. Yeah, I mean, the media has many resemblances to this, but for good or ill, most of us in the media have very little responsibility. We certainly don't control vast budgets or decide what bills go before Parliament and all these very important things that governments do, and we don't make regulations of the kind that this government does. And therefore, what we have got is we've got irresponsible people in very responsible jobs.
But what you've also got with...
It's their fault. They wanted these jobs. They went into ugly show business, wanting very much to have the top jobs, and they got them. When they got them, they suddenly found that they involved responsibilities they couldn't cope with. And that, I think, is what has happened.
Yes, and I think that may well be true of this particular situation, but this particular situation is so unprecedented. I know you and I differ on this, but it has never happened in my lifetime that this kind of terrible crisis has afflicted the entire world.
Well, on the contrary, it has happened. And as we know, the 68 to 69 Hong Kong flu was much worse. But governments.
Well, I was alive then, right?
And I was in this fashion as a result. It wasn't. People largely were unaware of it. And if you look at the fascinating website In Proportion, you'll find that previous flu epidemics. Yes, I know coronavirus isn't flu. Previous flu epidemics have had very similar peaks to this. Most Western European health services get very close to being overwhelmed. It's in several winters in any given case.
Let me ask you this.
It happens all the time.
No, but hang on.
New.
No, but in 68 and 69, Peter.
It's simply the scale of it does not justify the action. It's out of proportion. That's always been the problem.
All right, but in 68 and 69, we lived in a very different Britain, right? We had a much smaller population. We had a much less craven media. We didn't have social media. We didn't have internet access. We didn't have 24/7 news. We didn't have the ability to know every single thing and every single cough and spit that the government did. We certainly didn't have a daily briefing from the government in 68 and 69 about what was going on. And they could get away with a lot more, quite frankly.
All you're saying is true, but that doesn't suggest that the crisis is worse. It's just that the conditions in which it happens are worse. Fascinatingly, actually, if you look back over that time, the things we were obsessed with were strikes and the balance of payments.
Well, the only thing I remember about 1968 was Manchester United winning the European Cup and watching George Best and Dennis Law.
I have other more colourful memories of it than you, but that's because I was a revolutionary Marxist at the time. But in 1968? I wasn't particularly concerned with the flu.
Right.
But what the point you're making is not the disease hasn't changed. Its ability to kill and make people seriously ill hasn't changed.
So what's changed is the media.
The kind of society we are, and in some ways, it seems to me it's changed for the worse.
Yes, I agree with that.
We're less able to cope with this than we were, and we're a less mature, less responsible society. And I'd say politics. Do you remember a Labour politician called Cloburn Hughes?
Yes.
Well, he had a terrible. I'd say terrible. And he had a big birthmark on his face.
Yeah.
And I remember being told, and this hugely raised him in my estimation, because it's a great joke against himself, when colour television had begun to come in, he'd said, well, that's my political career done for. And that actually, oddly enough, before television became a major part of politics, before Parliament was televised and before so many debates were held on television, politics wasn't show business for ugly people in the way that it is now.
No.
And it attracted a different sort of person. Also, we had a better educated population. But
we had a much worse educated population. That's part of the problem. We've now got all these jumped up sort of, people with degrees who think they know a lot, and actually they're as thick as two short planks, and many of them are overeducated, and I think that's the problem. But let's finish with an agreement. I think we can agree on this, that the reason why it's different now is because governments now try to manage expectations, which they never did in the 60s.
Yes, I think people ask and expect more of politicians. Yeah. But politicians, instead of saying, no, we're not capable of that, they encourage this illusion that they are more important and powerful than they are.
Yes, I think that's right. Peter, a pleasure as ever. Thank you very much indeed. I'll see you next week. Try not to eat too many tomato sandwiches. This is Talk Radio.